There was once a wealthy and kind-hearted man named Mr. Johnson. He lived in a small village surrounded by rolling hills and lush forests. Mr. Johnson was known throughout the village for his generosity and willingness to help those in need. One day, a severe storm swept through the village, destroying many homes and leaving families without shelter. Mr. Johnson quickly sprang into action, using his wealth to provide food, clothing, and temporary housing for the affected families. As the villagers began to rebuild their lives, they were incredibly grateful to Mr. Johnson for his kindness. They would often visit him, thanking him profusely and promising to repay him someday. However, as time passed, the villagers began to forget about Mr. Johnson's kindness. They became busy with their own lives, and their gratitude slowly faded away. Years later, Mr. Johnson fell on hard times. He lost his business and his wealth, and he found himself struggling to make ends meet. He was forced to sell his grand house and move into a small, humble cottage. As Mr. Johnson struggled to get back on his feet, he reached out to the villagers he had helped years earlier. He hoped that they would remember his kindness and return the favor. But, to his surprise, the villagers seemed to have forgotten all about him. They would pass him on the street without recognizing him, or they would greet him with a cursory nod without offering any assistance. One day, Mr. Johnson decided to visit the village elder, a wise and respected man who had been a beneficiary of Mr. Johnson's kindness years earlier. The elder received Mr. Johnson warmly, but when Mr. Johnson asked for help, the elder seemed hesitant. "Mr. Johnson, I'm afraid we can't help you right now," the elder said. "We have our own problems to deal with, but I'm sure you'll get back on your feet soon." Mr. Johnson left the elder's house feeling disappointed and forgotten. He realized that the villagers had only been grateful for his kindness when it was convenient for them. When he needed their help, they seemed to have forgotten all about him. As Mr. Johnson walked away from the village, he couldn't help but feel a sense of sadness. He had given so much to the villagers, but when he needed their help, they were nowhere to be found. From that day on, Mr. Johnson became more cautious about who he helped and how he helped them. He realized that true kindness and generosity came from expecting nothing in return, not even gratitude.